My name is Robert Earl Calloway. I am 71 years old. I live alone in a small house on the edge of Fresno, California. I have a little garden in the back where I grow tomatoes. I have a dog named Chester, who is 12 years old and sleeps more than he walks. I have a rocking chair on my front porch, where I sit every evening and watch the sun go down behind the hills. And I have a ghost, not the kind that rattles chains or moves through walls, the kind that lives inside your chest, the kind that shows up when you smell a certain cologne, or hear a song on the radio, or see a boy running through a park who laughs just like someone you used to know. His name was Michael, my son, my firstborn. He died in a wildfire in September of 1993. He was 19 years old. I know this because I stood in a cold room at the Fresno County Coroner's office, and I looked at what the fire had left behind, and I said, yes, that is my son. I signed papers. I planned a funeral. I carried a small wooden urn up a hill, and I buried what remained of my boy under an oak tree. I know this because for 33 years, not a single day has passed where I have not felt the weight of that knowledge pressing down on my lungs like a stone. So you tell me how to explain what happened last Tuesday at 2:45 in the morning. My phone rang. The screen lit up with a number I did not recognize, an area code from somewhere in Oregon. I almost did not answer it. I was half asleep. Chester lifted his head from the floor and looked at me. I pressed accept, and a voice said, "Dad, it's me. It's Michael. I just found out who I am. I did not speak for a long time. I want you to understand what those words felt like. They felt like being underwater. They felt like all the air had been removed from the room. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. I said, 'Who is this?' The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. Then it said, 'I know how this sounds. I know you have no reason to believe me, but Dad, I have your eyes. I have Mom's hands. I have the birthmark on my left shoulder blade in the shape of a fishhook. You always called it my fishing mark. Nobody knew about that birthmark. Nobody living, anyway. My wife, Helen, she passed in 2019. Pneumonia. She was the only other person in the world who knew about that mark, because she was the one who discovered it when Michael was 3 days old, and she said, 'Robert, God already marked this one for adventure.' I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and Chester came and put his old gray head on my knee, and I started to cry. And that is where this story truly begins. Let me take you back. Let me show you who we were before everything fell apart. I grew up poor, not story. Poor, real poor. My father worked in a canning factory in Modesto, and my mother took in ironing from neighbors. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with 5 children and 1 bathroom and a kitchen table that had 1 leg propped up with a folded Bible. I used to joke that we ate dinner with the Word of God holding up our meals. I never finished college. I went 2 years, and then my father got sick, and I came home and started working at a hardware store. That was where I met Helen. She came in asking for a specific kind of hinge for a cabinet her father was building, and she described it in such careful detail that I stood there for 5 minutes just listening to her talk. Before I remembered I was supposed to be helping her. We got married in 1972. We were young and poor and completely sure that love was enough to carry us through anything. Michael was born in 1974. He came out crying like he was angry at the world for interrupting something important. The nurse laughed and said, "This one has opinions." She was right. From the time he could talk, Michael had something to say about everything. He was curious and stubborn, and he laughed with his whole body. When he thought something was funny, he would bend forward and slap his knee, and the sound of it would fill up whatever room we were in. He was my shadow. He followed me to the hardware store on Saturdays. He learned to change a tire when he was 10. He used to sit beside me while I watched baseball and ask me to explain every single play, and I would, and then he would say, "But why?" And I would explain again, and we would go like that for hours. Helen used to stand in the doorway watching us and shake her head and smile. When Michael was 15, we had another child, a daughter, Catherine. She was nothing like Michael. She was quiet and precise, and she read books the way other people breathe, constantly, automatically, as though she could not survive without them. Michael adored her. He called her professor from the day she could walk, because she had this way of studying everything like she was preparing a report. Those were good years, simple years. We did not have much money, but we had a full table and a loud house, and I never once went to sleep feeling like something was missing. Then Michael turned 18, and he started working summers up in the foothills outside of Fresno, with a crew doing land clearing and brush removal. He loved it. He loved being outside, loved the physical work, loved coming home sunburned and tired and eating everything on the table. The summer of 1993, there were fires everywhere in California. It was a dry year. The hills were brown by June. On the 14th of September, Michael's crew was working near a ridge east of Aubrey. The wind changed direction in the afternoon, faster than anyone expected, faster than anyone could run. 3 members of the crew died that day. Michael was one of them. I will not spend too long in this part of the story, because grief is a private country, and I do not like visitors in it. But you need to understand what those years did to us. Helen went quiet, not right away, but slowly. Like a radio losing signal. She still laughed sometimes, still cooked, still held Catherine when she cried. But there was a room inside her that she closed off and never opened again. I could feel the door of it whenever I walked past. Catherine was 15 when Michael died. She had just started high school. She had her brother's laugh, and she never used it the same way again. I went back to work after 2 weeks. I did not know what else to do. Standing still felt like drowning. Work felt like treading water, which is not great, but at least you are not sinking. Years passed. Catherine grew up. She became a librarian, which surprised no one. She married a man named Douglas. Douglas is the kind of man who tells you his job title within the first 30 seconds of meeting you. He is an accountant. He is not a bad man. He is just a man made entirely of sharp corners. They had 2 children, twins, a boy and a girl. Kevin and Abigail, my grandchildren, they are 20, 4 now. After Helen died in 2019, the house got very quiet. Catherine invited me to come live with them a few times. I said no, not because I did not want to be near my grandchildren, but because I had spent enough of my life learning that houses need the right mix of people to feel like homes, and I was not sure I was. Right ingredient for Catherine's. The truth is, and I say this with love, Catherine and Douglas had built a life that did not quite have room in it for an old man who cried sometimes for no reason and spent too much time sitting. In the dark, I was a reminder of things she preferred to keep at a certain distance. I understood. I did not like it. But I understood. Then Michael called. I did not call Catherine right away. I know that might seem strange, but I needed time to think, to sit with it, to make sure I was not losing my mind. The morning after the call, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I wrote down everything the voice had said to me. Every detail, the birthmark, the way he called me Dad with that slight hesitation before it, like he was trying the word on to see if it still fit. The fact that he said, "I just found out who I am," not "I'm alive," but "I found out who I am," as if identity was the bigger discovery. He had not given me a last name. He had not explained anything yet. He had said he would call again. He had said he needed a few days to gather some documents, some papers, before he could explain everything properly. I spent those days in a strange state that I can only describe as being half awake. I did things automatically. I fed Chester. I watered my tomatoes. I watched the news without hearing any of it. I went to bed at night and stared at the ceiling. On the fourth day, I finally called Catherine. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear her twins in the background, arguing about something. Normal household noise, the sound of a life continuing forward. "Dad," she said, "is everything okay? You never call in the afternoon." "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "Something important." "Hold on." I heard her close a door. "Quiet. What is it?" "I got a phone call," I said. "Last Tuesday night, at 2:45 in the morning." "From who?" I paused. "From someone who said he was Michael." The silence that followed was not the kind of silence that means someone is thinking carefully. It was the kind that means someone is getting ready to be upset. "Dad," she said slowly, "what are you talking about?" I know how it sounds, but he knew about the birthmark, Catherine, the fishhook on his left shoulder. Nobody knew about that except your mother and me. Dad. Her voice had changed. It had gone from concerned daughter to managing. "A problem. Someone is playing a trick on you. Someone found out about our family and they're taking advantage of you. You are 71 years old, you live alone, and you are still grieving Mom. This is exactly the kind of thing that predators do to Catherine," I said quietly. "I know what I heard. You know what you wanted to hear," she said. And her voice was not cruel, exactly, but it was final, like a door being closed. I did not argue with her. I never was much good at arguments. Helen used to say I had the disposition of a man who would rather be right in private than loud in public. I said, "I'll let you know if I hear more." She said, "Please don't get your hopes up, Dad." I hung up and sat with Chester and thought about hope. About whether hope was always a weakness, or whether sometimes it was the only thing keeping a person upright. 3 days later, Catherine and Douglas drove up to see me. I had not asked them to, but I was not surprised. Douglas shook my hand at the door with that firm, accountant handshake, and gave me a smile that said, "I am here to handle this situation." Catherine hugged me and I could feel the worry in her arms. We sat in my living room. I made coffee. Chester sniffed Douglas and then walked to the corner and lay down, which is his honest assessment of most people. Douglas said, "Robert, I've been doing some research." He had, he said, spoken to someone who works in elder fraud prevention. He had looked up statistics about scam phone calls targeting grieving parents. He had printed out articles, which he placed on my coffee table in a neat stack. "This is a very common tactic," he said, with the confidence of a man explaining something to a child. "They find out about your history. Obituaries are public record, you know, and they use personal sounding details to establish trust. The goal is usually financial. Has this person asked you for money?" "No," I said, "not yet." Douglas said, "That's the next step." I looked at the stack of papers. I looked at my son-in-law. I thought about all the things I could say. I said none of them, "I appreciate you coming." I said, "Dad," Catherine said, leaning forward, "we're just worried about you. You're alone up here, and we think," she glanced at Douglas, "we think it might be time to consider other arrangements, maybe somewhere with more support." There it was. The other arrangement, the place they had been circling for 2 years, the retirement community outside of Clovis where Douglas's mother had gone at 72. "I'm fine here," I said. "You're not fine," Douglas said. "You're a 71-year-old man receiving strange phone calls in the middle of the night and believing they're from your dead son. That is not fine, Robert." The way he said Robert. Not with disrespect, exactly, with something worse, with the particular patience of someone who has already made the decision and is simply waiting for you to catch up. I picked up my coffee cup. I looked out the window at my garden. The tomatoes were coming in red and heavy on the vine. I did not say anything. "Dad," Catherine said, "I heard you." I said, "I'll think about it." They stayed for dinner. Douglas made a call in the kitchen, while Catherine and I washed dishes. She said quietly, "I just don't want you to get hurt." "I know," I said. "Michael is gone, Dad. He's been gone for 33 years. I know you miss him. I do too. But I know Catherine." She dried her hands on a dish towel. She looked at me for a long moment with your mother's eyes, and I saw something in them that I had not seen in a long time. Not concern, grief, real deep grief. She missed him too. She always had. She just kept it in that clothes doff room, the same room Helen had kept hers in. I patted her hand. I said nothing else. After they left, I sat on my porch and waited for the stars to come out one by one, and Chester sat beside me, and the night was very quiet. He called again on a Thursday, same time, 2:47 in the morning. 2 minutes later than before, I was awake. I had been awake every night since the first call, sitting in my chair, waiting without admitting I was waiting. "Dad, I'm here," I said. He let out a breath, like he had been holding it. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." "I've been waiting," I said. And then he told me everything. His name was now Michael Garrett. He was 50 years old. He lived in a small town in southern Oregon called Talent. Yes, that is a real place. I looked it up, where he worked as a carpenter. He had a wife named Susan and a daughter named Beth who was 22 and studying nursing. He had grown up in that town. He had been raised by a couple named Earl and Donna Garrett, who he had believed his whole life were his biological parents. Earl had died 8 years ago. Donna had died in March of this year, 2026, after a long illness. And when Donna died, she left behind a letter. The letter, he said, had been in an envelope sealed with tape and marked, "For Michael," to be opened only after my death. In the letter, Donna explained everything. In September of 1993, Earl Garrett had been working as a volunteer firefighter in the Fresno foothills. He had been part of the crew that responded to the fire on the ridge east of Aubrey. When they reached one of the areas of the fire line, they found a young man, severely burned, barely breathing, no ID, no gear, just a young man, maybe 19 or 20, unconscious in a drainage ditch where a narrow stream had given him just enough protection to survive. Earl pulled him out, loaded him into the truck, drove him to a small clinic in Prather rather than the main hospital in Fresno. Why not the hospital in Fresno? That is the part of Donna's letter that the man on the phone hesitated over. He was quiet for almost 10 seconds. Because, he said slowly, Earl had looked at the young man, and he saw something he recognized, or thought he recognized. The letter isn't clear, but it says that Earl had been, that he had struggled with something for a long time, and he saw this boy, and he made a decision, a bad decision. He brought the boy to the clinic in Prather, and he told them the boy was his nephew, and then he and Donna. They took him home. I was standing up. I do not remember standing up. I was standing in the middle of my dark living room with my hand pressed flat against my chest. "The burns," the voice continued, were bad enough that the young man lost most of his memory, not permanently, they thought, but weeks passed, then months. "Donna," said I. He seemed happy, peaceful. I learned to walk again, to talk, to do things. I learned their last name as naturally as breathing. But I started. "The doctors called it trauma-induced amnesia," he said. Donna's letter says they took me to a doctor in Medford. The doctor said the memory might return someday, might not, that it was better not to force it, that I seemed stable. "She just kept you," I said. "She kept me," he agreed. His voice broke on that, just slightly. "Dad, I am not making excuses for her. She was not a bad woman. I loved her. I love her still. But what she did she was wrong. She was so wrong. And I think she knew it, which is why she left." The letter, I sat back down. My legs had decided they were done standing. "The fire," I said. "They identified 3 bodies." "I know," he said. "Donna's letter says there was another boy, from the crew. He was found near where Earl found me. She doesn't say his name. She says Earl never told her his name, just that there was another body. And it was. It was identified as Michael Calloway. And there it was, the truth that had been buried for 33 years under an oak tree on a hill outside Fresno. Not my son, someone else's son, a boy whose family had grieved him and never known the truth. And my son, my Michael, had been alive this whole time, 70 miles north, learning a different name. I cried. I am not embarrassed to tell you that. I sat in my dark living room, and I cried the way I had not cried since the night I came home from the coroner's office in 1993. Deep, old crying, the kind that lives in your bones. And on the other end of the phone, my son cried too. We agreed that he would come to Fresno the following weekend, he and his wife Susan. I did not call Catherine beforehand. I thought about it. I decided to wait until I had held him in my arms and looked at his face. I needed that first. I needed to know with my body, not just my ears and heart. He arrived on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. A blue truck turned onto my street and parked in front of the house, and I was sitting on the porch and I watched the door open. He is 50 years old. He is taller than I remembered, but of course he was 19 when I last saw him. He has my father's broad shoulders. He walks with a slight forward lean, the way men who work with their hands tend to walk, as though they are always moving toward the next thing that needs to be fixed. He stopped at the end of the porch steps and looked up at me. The sun was behind him. I had to shade my eyes to see his face. He said, "Hi, Dad." I said, "Hi, son." And then I was down those steps faster than a 71-year-old man with bad knees has any right to move, and I had my arms around him, and he was real, solid and real and warm. He smelled like sawdust and coffee and something underneath that I could not name but recognized in the way you recognize something that was part of you long before you had words for it. His wife Susan stood by the truck. She had a kind face. She was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. We went inside. We sat at my kitchen table. We talked for 6 hours. He remembered nothing of his life before Talent, Oregon. Even after reading Donna's letter, the memories had not come back. The doctors he had seen since then confirmed that they likely never would. The injury and the amnesia were permanent, but he had photographs. He had the letter. He had DNA. He had arranged for a test through one of those genealogy services before coming to see me. He had the results on his phone. He was Michael Robert Calloway, 97% probability. He was my son. I called Catherine that evening. Michael was still at the house. She did not believe me. "Dad, I cannot believe you are still, Catherine." I said, "I need you to come here tomorrow. I need you to see something. I'm not going to come watch some stranger take advantage of you. He has a DNA test," I said. "He has a letter from the woman who raised him. He has a birthmark on his left shoulder, blade in the shape of a fishhook. He has Dad's shoulders and Mom's hands. Come tomorrow, Catherine, please." Long silence. Douglas thinks, I'm not asking Douglas. I said, I'm asking my daughter. She came the next morning. Alone. She left Douglas at home. I will not describe everything about that meeting in detail, because some things are private, even in a story you choose to share. But I will tell you this. Catherine walked into my living room, and she saw Michael standing by the window, looking out at my tomato garden, the way he always used to look out of windows as a boy, with his arms crossed and his weight on one hip, and she stopped in the doorway, and her hand went to her mouth. She stood there for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "You lean on your left hip. You always did that. Michael always." She stopped. Started again. "You always stood like that." He turned around. He looked at his little sister, who was 51 years old and had been grieving him since she was 15. And he said, "Hi, Professor." She collapsed. Not fell, collapsed. Just folded right there in the doorway, down onto her knees on the old wooden floor. And the sound that came out of her was the sound of 33 years. I went to her. Michael came to her. The three of us were on the floor of my living room for I don't know how long. Chester came and wedged himself into the middle of it. He has always known when people need dogs. The following weekend, Catherine organized what she called a family gathering. This is where things got complicated again. Douglas came. Kevin and Abigail came. Catherine's cousin Linda and her husband drove in from Sacramento. A few more relatives who shall remain nameless, but who have opinions about everything. Michael came with Susan and their daughter Beth. Beth, who had grown up in Oregon knowing nothing of this, sat very straight in a chair and watched everything with large, careful eyes. It started well enough. There were introductions. There was food. There was the slightly formal politeness of people who are not sure of the rules yet. And then Douglas started asking questions. He started, he said, just to get clarity. Financial clarity. Because, he said, folding his hands on the table, if there is a legal recognition of this situation, there are implications. Regarding your father's estate, for instance. I watched Michael's face when Douglas said that. His expression did not change much. He just went a little still. Susan reached over and put her hand on Michael's arm. I'm not here for an estate, Michael said calmly. I have a house. I have a job. I built my own life. I came here for one reason, because I found out I had a father who was still alive, and I needed to look him in the eye. Douglas smiled the smile of a man who has heard this before. Of course, I understand. I just think it's prudent to, Douglas, Catherine said quietly. He ignored her. He kept going. He pulled out his phone. He had, he said, made a few calls. There were questions about the legal validity of a DNA test from a commercial genealogy service. There were questions about why a person who had been raised by other people would suddenly appear claiming family ties. There were questions about whether this was a legally deceased individual attempting to claim inheritance. Michael looked at Douglas for a long moment. He said, I don't want anything from you, any of you. That's not the point, Douglas said. Then what is the point? Michael asked. The point, Douglas said, is that my father-in-law is a vulnerable elderly man who has been grieving for 33 years, and someone has constructed an extremely clever stop. This was Catherine. Her voice was sharp and flat. Douglas, stop. He stopped. She looked at her husband for a long moment. Then she looked at her brother. Then she looked at me. I know who he is, she said. I knew it the moment I walked into Dad's house and saw him standing by the window. I've been watching him all weekend. I know who he is, and I should have said that louder from the beginning. The room was quiet. Kevin, my grandson, 24 years old, cleared his throat. Uncle Mike, he said with the casualness of a young person who has not learned yet that some moments deserve ceremony. What was it like growing up not knowing who you were? Michael looked at him. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not a happy smile, exactly, a real one. It's strange, he said. Because you don't know, you understand. You just live. You just are who you are. But there was always something, like a word at the tip of your tongue that you can never quite get to. He looked at me, and now I'm here, he said, and I think maybe that's what that feeling was. I did not say anything. I did not have to. 3 days after that family meeting, Douglas came to my house alone. He knocked on the door. Chester barked once and was quiet, which is Chester's version of a welcome. Douglas stood on my porch. He had the look of a man who has recently been made to feel very small and has not yet decided how to carry that feeling. He said, I called a private genealogist, someone I know through a client. I asked her to look into it. All right, I said. She confirmed everything, he said. Asterisk, the records from the clinic in Prather. Earl Garrett's volunteer fire records from September 1993. The coroner's records from the fire. There was a discrepancy that was never followed up on. Procedural error in the identification, it was. He stopped, pressed his mouth together. It was all exactly what he said it was. I waited. I was wrong, Douglas said. The words came out like they cost him something. I was trying to protect Catherine, and I handled it badly, and I was wrong. Yes, I said. You were, he nodded. He looked down at Chester, who was leaning against my leg. I'd like to apologize to Michael, properly, if you think he'd be willing to hear it. You'll have to ask him yourself, I said. He's his own man, always was. Douglas nodded again. He shook my hand. He left. I stood on the porch for a while after his truck had gone. The afternoon light was long and golden across my tomato plants. Chester sneezed. I thought about all the years I had spent in this house, alone with my grief, believing I had failed to protect my son, believing I had somehow been insufficient as a father, as a man, as someone who could hold his family together. And I thought about how grief can make you smaller without you noticing, how it can make you accept being dismissed and talked over and worry about because you have stopped trusting your own mind, your own heart, your own knowing. My son was alive. I had known it in my bones the moment I heard his voice, and I had been right. The week after that, Michael and I drove together up into the hills east of Fresno. It was a clear morning, the kind of morning where the air is so clean, it almost hurts to breathe. We drove in my old truck, Michael behind the wheel, up roads that wound into the foothills until I told him to stop at a place where a low fence and a wooden gate marked a private property that had long since been abandoned. We walked up the hill. Chester came with us, moving slowly, his old joints complaining, but his tail going steadily. Under the oak tree there was a stone. It said, Michael Robert Calloway, 1974-1993. Beloved son and brother adventure was in his bones. Michael stood in front of it for a long time. Who's buried here? He asked quietly. I don't know, I said. Some other mother's son, someone we were never able to identify. Michael crouched down in front of the stone. He touched the letters, his name, someone else's death. I want to find out who he was, he said. Someday. I want to find out who he was and make sure his family knows. That, I said, sounds like something you would say. He looked up at me. Was I like this before? You were exactly like this, I said. He stood up. He stood beside me. Two men, one old and one not so old, standing under an oak tree in the California hills, with the wind moving through the grass and a 12-year-old dog sitting patiently between them. I'm sorry I was gone, he said. You didn't go anywhere, I said. You just got lost. He put his arm around my shoulders, this 50-year-old stranger who was my son, and we stood there for a while in the good silence that only exists between people who do not need to fill every moment with words. I will wrap this up now, because some endings do not need to be long. Some truths are simple. Michael and Susan came down from Oregon 4 more times that year. Beth, his daughter, my granddaughter, a word that still surprises me when I say it, came once with her fiancé, a quiet young man named Paul, who shook my hand very earnestly and then spent an hour in the garden with me learning about tomatoes. Kevin and Abigail, Catherine's twins, started calling Michael Uncle Mike within about 3 weeks. Young people are good that way. They do not need as much time to accept the miraculous. Douglas has been, as far as I can tell, trying hard. He had dinner with Michael and Susan in February. He did not bring any articles or printed materials. This is progress. Catherine has her brother back. I see what that does to her. I see the room inside her starting to open again, slowly, like a window that has been painted shut, finally being coaxed free. My house is loud sometimes now, on weekends, the way houses should be, and I still sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun go down. But now there is usually someone sitting next to me, and Chester is usually asleep between our chairs, and the silence is not the heavy kind anymore. It is the kind that is full. I have thought a long time about why I wanted to share this story. I am not a man who needs an audience. I am not trying to make anyone feel guilty. I am not telling this to embarrass my daughter or shame my son-in-law. I am telling it because I was a quiet man who was told, for 2 years, that his instincts could not be trusted, who was made to feel that his age made him less capable of knowing what was real, who was watched and pitied and managed by the very people who loved him. And I was right, not because I am special, but because love is not senility, grief is not stupidity, and a father who knows his son does not stop knowing him just because 33 years have passed. There is something else too. Douglas was not a villain. Catherine was not cruel. They were scared. They were trying to protect something in their own clumsy way. The instinct to protect the people we love is good. It is the execution that matters. There is a difference between protecting someone and diminishing them. There is a difference between concern and control. And then there is the bigger lesson, the one about time. My son was alive for 33 years, and I did not know it. 33 years of separate lives, separate griefs, separate questions. Neither of us could get those years back. No amount of guilt, no amount of regret, no amount of explaining what happened in September of 1993 was going to give us back our Saturdays at the hardware store, our baseball games, our slow evenings on the porch. What we had was what was left, and what was left was enough. If there is someone in your life right now that you have been taking for granted, an old parent, a quiet sibling, a friend who always answers the phone, do not wait for a call at 2:45 in the morning to remind you what they mean to you. Do not wait for a DNA test to tell you who belongs to you. Go, call, sit with them, let them talk. Let them be right sometimes, even when you are not sure they are. Because the truth has a way of coming out. It always does. And you want to be on the right side of it when it does.